Excellent. Ready to go. All right. Thanks everyone for being here tonight. Thanks for answering the poll questions. I'm Charlotte and joined with Suzanne tonight. We'll talk about eco-friendly spring pest management. And thank you to the Clean Water Program of Alameda County for hosting tonight. So what we're going to go through, it sounds like a lot of you are familiar with the Our Water Our World program, but we're going to, of course, for others, we're going to review what we do. We'll give you an overview of integrated pest management, or IPM, talk about pests and preventative care. And then we are going to focus on some spring pests that you are probably, many of you are familiar with in the garden. It will be a lot of pests, so hopefully it won't be too much for you. And then tips for using pesticides if you choose to do so. We'll cover some invasive pests at the end and offer additional resources in addition to the handout that Suzanne has already sent out to you. And if you haven't received that, you can put it in the Q&A or the chat, and we can make sure you get that. Feel free to add questions to the Q&A at any time, and Suzanne and I will be reviewing as we go. And of course, at the end, we will also have time for questions. So today we are sponsored by the Alameda County Clean Water Program, which works to protect Alameda County creeks, wetlands, and the bay from runoff that may carry pollutants into the waterways. Related to gardening, that means avoiding chemicals that can be washed off into the lawn or from the lawn and garden and into the storm drains by irrigation and rain. You can learn more at cleanwaterprogram.org. And when you're there, you can also sign up for their newsletter on the right side of the page. And if you get their newsletter, you will be updated on upcoming events like these webinars, though this is the last of the season, but we will be starting up in the fall as well. And then any, of course, in-person events and any other related programming. Today, we're going to be talking about spring pests, but if there's any topic that kind of piques your interest, we have probably already had a webinar about it. So feel free to check out the YouTube channel, the Clean Water Program of Alameda County YouTube channel. Has all of our past webinars on it, covering lots of different topics from pollinators, soil basics, drought proofing your garden, veggie gardening, roses, and more. So we go more into depth in certain topics there. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, our Water Our World program is it's a national award-winning program focused on water pollution prevention. We partner with agencies and retail stores. The goal is to bring awareness between pesticides and water quality, and understand the impact we have when we are using products around the home and garden that we have on our local waterways. We partner with retailers in many different counties across the state to provide information at point of sale, handouts, QR codes, and signage like these little blue tags on the shelf. Information for you, available for you when you're dealing with a pest problem or working in your garden. And then those blue tags are going to highlight the less toxic products on the shelf as well. You can learn more about our Water Our World at ourwaterourworld.org. And of course, a big focus is drawing that connection between what we do in our homes and our gardens and what effect it has on the watersheds and water quality. Now, a watershed is an area of land that drains into a single body of water. They can be as small as your yard, and they can be as big as the San Francisco Bay watershed, which is huge. Half of all water that lands on the state of California, both in rain or snow or irrigation, does drain into the San Francisco Bay. When it moves through, from the mountains down through the Delta and then through cities and through rural areas and urban areas, it picks up a lot of material. All the water that doesn't get absorbed into the soil picks up a lot of material, motor oil, pet waste, debris, pesticides, fertilizers. And once it enters the storm drain at the street level, it goes directly to a waterway without any filtration in between. So that's a lot of potential urban runoff and material going into our storm drains and therefore our waterways. And I will share that also any water that leaves that goes into the wastewater treatment facility through your house drain, does go to a wastewater treatment facility, but pesticides are not removed there either. So we want to make sure that when we are dealing with pesticides, we are using them as safely and carefully as possible. And then when we are done, we want to take them to household hazardous waste and not dump them down the drain, because that will still get into our waterways that way. And one way to reduce pesticide usage in the garden and the home is to practice integrated pest management. Integrated pest management, or IPM for short, is a decision-making process, asks a lot of questions, and uses science-based strategies. We look at the garden or the home as a whole, taking a big step back and kind of understanding what's happening. We can ask ourselves some questions. What is the problem at hand is a big one. So when we see problems in our garden or our home, it might just be a symptom of something. There's a reason usually why there's a pest on a plant. So if we need to figure out that reason instead of just dealing with that pest. And then also asking ourselves, can we live with it? Understanding our thresholds, our tolerance levels. Of course, they're very different in the home versus out in the garden. But understanding, can we live with it? Is it really causing problems? Is it a short-term problem? Maybe we can just kind of, like some of you in the poll said, just, wait and see and not deal with it quite yet, because maybe it's not going to be a problem, or maybe it's so short-term that your plant will bounce back real quick. Then we have our steps to integrated pest management. Number one is prevention. We'll talk a lot about preventative steps for pests today. That's a lot of it's just having a healthy garden. If you have a healthy, diverse garden, you will have fewer pests because pests are really attracted to stressed out plants. And then we want to focus on identification. For those of you who said you get curious and you like to learn more, the steps for you, always identifying the problem. Is it a pest problem, or is it an environmental issue? Something else related to watering or fertilizing? And then if it is a pest, what pest is it? We need to know exactly what we're dealing with before we take action. Hopefully we'll be able to help you understand why that's so important today. And then we have our action steps. Cultural controls is really focusing on the health of the garden, changing the environment to really benefit our garden and not benefit, be less of a benefit for our pests, just creating a not good environment for pests. Hopefully they will go elsewhere. Mechanical controls, physical traps, barriers, and tools in the garden. Biological controls are using really supporting the ecosystem, understanding the beneficial insects and other critters out in the garden that can actually help control pests for us. And then lastly is chemical controls, which are pesticides. In IPM, we always use them as a last resort, and often we can choose not to use them at all because, as we'll discuss later, they are a short-term solution, and if we don't solve the problem at hand, the pesticides will not solve that problem for us. Since cultural controls are so important, we are going to touch on those today. And then of course, when we go through pests, we'll talk about, how to address them with cultural, mechanical, biological, and chemical controls per pest. But generally what we want to focus on with cultural controls is building healthy soil, using compost, cover crops, organic fertilizers, mulch. We want to always use organic fertilizers when we are feeding our plants to promote sustained healthy growth instead of growth spurts. We always want to protect the soil with a nice layer of mulch that will help seal in moisture, feed the soil, protect the soil from erosion and drying up too quickly. We are going to water plants deeply and less often, especially those established plants. Of course, according to the plant needs, we're always going to understand what the plant needs, and we'll try to give it as much, give it the conditions that it requires, which will lead to healthier plants. We want to plant the right plant in the right place, both regionally. So, we are in the Bay Area. We want to be conscious of that. Our Bay Area climate is quite unusual compared to the rest of the country. So being aware of that, but also, East Bay, different parts of the East Bay are much hotter. The San Francisco is much cooler, and within our own yards, we have microclimates. So really understanding where you're putting the plant and is that plant going to get its needs met in that spot, sun, water, wind, taking all that into consideration. A right plant in the right place will be happier, healthier, easier to maintain, use less water, and just generally have less pests as well. We are going to avoid excessive pruning and really just prune selectively by the plant needs. And removing problem areas as needed. And we want to rotate annual food crops, always moving them, planting them in new areas of the garden to reduce pests. And just a little bit more about watering. So I mentioned established plants need less frequent but deeper watering. And when we're watering, we're always going to focus water at the drip line of the plant, which is the outer edge of the plant, where, if it were raining, the water would be dripping off the edge. That is where the roots are and where the roots that take in water are. We don't want to water right at the crown of the plant because that can invite disease, and it really is inefficient because the roots right at the base are not actually absorbing water. Keep in mind, though, that plants that are freshly in the ground or young plants like seedlings will need more consistent water, even if they are drought tolerant. When they're first put in the ground and they're small, they need our help. They are like little toddlers, I like to call them. They need a little bit more help. They need consistent water, not soggy, but still moisture. And we are going to use that water to actually help them grow deep, sturdy roots. So we want our roots to go out and down, and we're going to use water to do that by always watering at the drip line, the outer edge, and watering deeply so that the roots follow that water nice and deep as well.
All right. So let's talk about pests. I always like to start by asking, what is a pest? A pest is going to be a living organism, typically an insect that annoys us, and also can do some damage around the garden, maybe nibble on some food crops, nibble on some flowers. So that's really what we're focusing on this afternoon, is focusing on what is a pest and how can we manage some of the common pests we're going to see. So as Charlotte mentioned, proper identification is key. If we're not able to identify what we think that pest is, then we're not going to be able to solve that problem. This is very important. We want to, and here in this photo, we have two caterpillars. Both are eating the leaves of the plant. Caterpillars' number one job is just to eat leaves of the plant, its host plant. We have the monarch butterfly caterpillar, which many of us, will cherish as desirable, caterpillar that we want to protect because it becomes a monarch, which is, struggling. But then we also have the white-lined sphinx moth, sphinx moth caterpillar, which is also in the hornworm family. And many of us have been faced with tomato hornworms, which we see as a pest. However, I am here to share that that hornworm is going to pupate and transition into the white-lined sphinx moth or hummingbird moth, which is a very important pollinator. So here we have to weigh, is it a pest or a pal? Charlotte, you can hit the next. You can advance. Is it advancing? That's weird. Okay, there we go. Yeah. So identification is always key. We want to identify that pest. We want to understand that life cycle of that pest. And then we want to understand the habitat and timing of that pest. So like right now, many of us are seeing the spittle bug. Spittle bugs show up typically every April, but we are kind of having a very cool, wet spring. So things are about 3 weeks behind schedule. When we see the spittle bugs, I know that's what it is. I know someone didn't spit on my plants. I understand the life cycle is about 2 weeks. They're not doing much harm, if any, to my plants. So there's a very high level of tolerance. I don't need to take any action. And I am also planting a huge diversity of flowering plants. So I'm attracting those beneficial insects. So I know that those spittle bugs are going to, that there's going to be a healthy balance there. But that's something we always want to keep in mind. So here is another example, Pester Pal. This is a ornamental plum tree that's actually a street tree planted just along the sidewalk in front of someone's house, one of the guests that joined us before. And they were curious about what's going on. What are these insects on my plant, on my tree? And do I need to treat it? So what we have here is the ladybug pupa, which is our beneficial insect that is actually enjoying the soft scale insect as a nice tasty snack. So when we look a little closer and we see the pest, a very common pest of plums, which is soft scale, we see it present. Let's look a little closer and see if we have any signs of beneficial insects, because if we do, then we absolutely want to avoid using a pesticide. Even an eco-friendly pesticide is going to harm the beneficial insects and then break that balance. And then this is, we're right on time. This is a very common pest problem that we see in the garden. The question here is, you see this on the leaves of your fruit tree in the spring, what do you do? We want to understand what's going on, because the top right picture, that's actually plum leaves, and that puckering is from aphids. And then we have peach leaf curl, and that puckering and blistering is from a fungus. So we have two different pests. So when we can identify the pest, then we can properly treat it. So we would want to use an insecticide, such as insecticidal soap, to manage the aphids on the plum. Or better yet, we would just wait to see if there's beneficial insects present, managing the problem for us. And then for the peach leaf curl, we would manage with a fungicide. And then this is one of my favorite pictures. I just love it. Every time I see it, I get kind of excited because it's really crazy. That's a lot of aphids. So have you ever noticed that certain pests are on one plant and not another? So this is what excites me, because when we, something about pest management and getting curious is understanding the host plant. So many pests are specific to that host. So for instance, in the slide before, peach leaf curl only affects peaches and nectarines. That's it, okay? And then aphids, when it comes to aphids, they are seasonal to be expected. However, we will see more of an abundance on plants that are stressed. And definitely we're going to see more of abundance when we don't have, when there's a lack of beneficial predators, when we don't have those lacewings and ladybugs and syrphid flies and so forth. So when we see something like this, it is a clue that something else is going on. And there you have it. Some pests are seasonal and to be expected. Understand that pests are food for the beneficial insects. And this is really an important takeaway, because without having food for the beneficials, we're not going to have that healthy balance in the garden. So we might want to reevaluate our thresholds of tolerance, because the plants can handle quite a bit of damage. It's us that typically have no tolerance for the pests. And we want absolutely no damage to the plants. But that's not really how it works in a healthy ecosystem. A little bit of messiness, A little bit of imperfection is actually perfection. And then, as I mentioned, an infestation of a pest can be a clue that something is not working or that the plant is stressed. So we want to address the cause. We want to make sure it's getting irrigated properly, that soil is draining properly, that we are feeding organically, that plant's in the right place, and it's getting everything that that plant needs. And then once we can address that cause, then we're going to find the balance.
All right, so now let's dive into some actual specific pest management. Now we're gonna, talk about everything in terms of these IPM steps as well. So let's first talk weeds. I'm sure everyone's dealing with that. It's very expected in the spring after some very heavy winter rains. Lots and lots of weeds around. Hopefully, we've kept up a little bit throughout the winter and pulled, dealt with as many as possible when they first emerge, because they're always easier to deal with right at the beginning when they're young. I know that's challenging, especially when it's just raining all the time. But hopefully, so the earlier the better with weeds. It'll just be easier to disturb them, easier to get rid of them. And then, of course, and we don't want to do that actually when the soil is drier, because when we do it during wet, we could risk soil compaction and really creating an unhealthy soil environment for later. So we also want to mow or trim them down if they get too tall. Any kind of disturbance is going to be really helpful. You don't have to pull every single weed. You don't have to get every single bit of root out. I know that's obviously the ideal, but if we are just disturbing weeds from the beginning and keeping consistent with it, cutting them down, hoeing them, mowing, trimming, pulling, covering or like smothering them with mulch, or better yet, cardboard and mulch would be sheet mulching. Anything we can do to disturb those weeds, over time, they're gonna stop coming back as much. It takes a long time and a lot of persistence, but it is the best way to manage them. And yes, if you can mow or trim them or get them out of there before they go to seed, you're gonna reduce spreading more of them in your garden. If you do want to consider an herbicide, there are several eco-friendly herbicides out there. These are post-emergent, meaning they only work when the plant has, the weed has germinated and is, growing above ground. It's emerged from the soil. It's non-selective, meaning it kills any kind of plant material in front of it. So you do need to be very careful when you're spraying around plants that you do want around. And then their contact kills, so that means that they must come in contact with the plant tissue, and then they will kill on contact. So the ortho ground clear weed and grass with the active ingredient ammonium nonanoate. There's the Captain Jack's Dead Weed Brew, which is caprylic acid and capric acid. And then there are some horticultural vinegars out there, being very careful with those, because that level of vinegar, being careful with any of these, of course, reading the label, wearing our PPE, but yes, remembering that even vinegar can be quite harmful to our skin and our eyes. So we always want to be very careful when spraying any of these pesticides. Suzanne mentioned peach leaf curl earlier. It is a fungus, and it is very expected in the Bay Area, and especially this spring, because we had a long, cool, wet spring. So very, very common. And also, we talked about thresholds. It's not going to kill your plant when it first emerges, so don't worry too much. We are going to, it is expected, so we know it's going to happen. We're going to understand it. We are going to try to remove as many of the infected leaves as possible. Just pull them off the plant. And then another flush of leaves will come, and your plant will grow, your tree will grow nice through the spring and summer afterwards. But you do want to get those leaves out of there. If they fall on the ground, pick them up as fast as possible. Get them off site. Do not put them in your compost bin, or don't put them in your backyard compost. You can put them in your green bin that goes to the city. But yeah, you don't want those infected leaves staying on site because they will spread and stick around for the next year. And remember that peach leaf curl only affects peaches and nectarine trees. So if you're seeing some sort of curly leaf, like that picture that Suzanne shared earlier on like a pear tree or an apple tree, it's definitely not peach leaf curl. It could be an insect infestation or something else. So how to treat it besides removing the leaves, we are going to focus on just having a really healthy plant. We are going to top dress the root zone or the drip line with compost. We will feed with organic fertilizers. You can use a liquid seaweed or kelp fertilizer as a foliar spray, which would be spraying it on the leaves. And then make sure that the tree is getting deep, infrequent irrigation according to its, age and needs, and based on your soil and your environment as well. Not every yard is different, so irrigation depends on your specific conditions. Then, so we've focused on the plant health, we've removed the leaves. These are all cultural controls and mechanical controls. Then it is recommended to focus on prevention with a copper fungicide. So what you're going to do is come October, November, you can go out and get a copper fungicide, and you are going to spray that on the tree. Once the tree has lost its leaves, you can spray it 3 times during the dormant season when there's no leaves on the tree, around Thanksgiving, around Christmas, and then around Valentine's Day, if the buds have not broken by then, and if they have broken by then, we're not going to spray. So that is how you treat peach leaf curl. For now, just remove the leaves, focus on plant health, don't do anything else, and then wait for the dormant season. And then we have some other fungal diseases that I'm sure everyone's seeing a lot of: black spot, rust, and powdery mildew. Maybe not yet, but we will soon. Black spot and rust affects the older leaves. So what we can do is just remove those older leaves, just strip that area. We want to reduce our overhead watering because those two, rust and black spot, are transmitted through water droplets and really like moist, cool conditions. So we're going to avoid watering overhead. We're going to maybe switch to drip irrigation or just a really focused hand watering on the soil. And then, of course, depending on the plant, you can maybe even prune up the lower branches and leaves that maybe get splashed by any watering, and then that reduces the water in the plant. And also we want to prune for increased airflow. And then, of course, focusing on the plant health will always benefit any fungal disease and insect infestation. Now, powdery mildew is a little different. It actually prefers, drier, warmer conditions. So we might not be seeing it yet, but we will see it later in the summer. And so because it likes drier, warmer conditions, we want to actually use water to wash powdery mildew off. But we want to do that early in the morning so that our plant is dried out before nightfall to reduce black spot and rust and other fungal diseases. And then if we want to go for a fungicide, there are several options out there. Sulfur, which usually comes in a powder form, copper soap or copper fungicide, neem oil, and there are some bacteria-based fungicides as well. Suzanne, do you have anything to add to the fungal diseases?
Sorry, my cursor was somewhere else. No, that was great.
Okay.
Yeah, that was everything. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Just checking. I knew you had some.
It's just that, a lot of people are seeing black spot like on their roses or their hydrangeas, but it's really from last year. So we just want to remove those, as you mentioned. So, yep.
And as you said earlier, plants can tolerate a lot more damage than we see.
Yeah, I had to defoliate my roses completely, and then there's beautiful new leaves on it, and there's still a couple leaves that had the black spot, and it's not getting on the new leaves. It's fine. So yes, absolutely. Great. All right, super.
All right, moving on. Snails, slugs, and earwigs. very common right now, especially in the cooler, wet winters. I mean, not winter, cooler, wet temperature environment we're having still, even in May. Traps are excellent for these critters. You could use like a trap with beer in it. This is very common for snails and slugs. They do like beer, they go in and they drown a nice drunken death. That can be one option. There are slug and snail traps that you can purchase as well. Or you can create a snail board, which is pictured on the bottom left, which is just a board that is raised a little bit off the ground. Snails and slugs go under it in the heat of the day because they don't like to be in the sun or the heat. And then you can just lift it up during the heat of the day and scrape them off into some soapy water or feed them to your chickens if you want. Earwigs, you can also create a trap as well, similar to the snails and slugs, like a sunken either deli container or tuna can. They are more attracted to like fishy oil, like fish oil, like tuna oil or something like that. Or you can try an oil with soy sauce and like a little dish soap. You can try something like that, but they are attracted to that. They will fall in as well. Some physical barriers that we can use for snails and slugs would be the copper tape barrier. They just don't like crawling over copper, so that you can line some pots or raised beds with that. And chunky bark mulch can actually deter them as well, as they don't like to climb over it. Some eco-friendly baits are iron phosphate, which would be the Sluggo, or there's several other Sluggo and Sluggo and there are some other brands as well that is just iron phosphate. And then something like Bug and Slug Killer, pictured on the bottom right, or Sluggo Plus, has iron phosphate with spinosad, which will also help with earwigs and roly-polies and some other critters as well. But just note that these products will melt in like heavily irrigated or rainy conditions. So you might want to wait till the rain is really over. I don't know if that's yet or not, but just check the weather before you apply, or else it will just kind of disintegrate quickly into the soil and you will have wasted some pesticide. Okay, aphids. Everyone is dealing with aphids. They are expected during spring. So even if you have an aphid infestation or you see aphids on a plant, doesn't always mean that your plant is struggling. They are expected. So we can expect a certain level of them. Well, if it gets really bad, like Suzanne's favorite picture of that rosebud, then yes, there's probably a sign that there's something going on with that plant. Females are already pregnant at birth, so they are ready to create more aphids very quickly. So that's why the population just explodes quite quickly. Using synthetic fertilizers can attract them, because when we use synthetic fertilizers as opposed to organic fertilizers, the plant is growing real fast, pushing out a lot of new growth, and pests, and especially aphids, really like that new growth. Also, pushing out new growth really fast stresses a plant out. Stressed out plant equals more pests, especially aphids. Same with excessive pruning. If we're pruning a plant a lot, that a pruned plant, when a plant is pruned, they push out a lot more growth. So if you're pruning too much, you're going to encourage a lot more growth. Same thing, stress and new growth attracts aphids. If you see ants on the plant, it's usually a sign that there are aphids or some other sucking insect in the vicinity. So check for those, and you can also keep the ants away with a strong stream of water, or you can use like tanglefoot or a sticky insect glue to keep the ants away. And of course, aphids increase when there's a lack of predators. All pests do. So we want to make sure there are plenty of predators in the area, like ladybugs. Similarly, whiteflies you're also going to see those a lot right now. They thrive in warm conditions. So as it warms up, we'll see more of them. They are often a sign of overwatering or poor drainage. So usually a plant that is stressed out due to improper watering will attract whiteflies. just like aphids, synthetic fertilizers will help attract them. And they are very susceptible to predators, so we want to make sure that we have lots of those around. And some other solutions for both aphids and whiteflies is, of course, inviting in those beneficial insects, releasing ladybugs or attracting them to your garden with using lots of diverse plants, feeding with organic fertilizers, making sure your plants are getting the correct irrigation, good drainage, deep watering, not too much, not too little, really focusing on, feeling the soil, understanding how the plants and the soil absorbs water. You can use sticky traps to monitor for both aphids and whitefly, see if they're in the area. And then, first step would also always be either to just wash the plants off with a strong stream of water or wipe them off, squish them, just, manually, physically removing them will be definitely the first step. Just make sure, of course, there's no ladybugs or any other lacewings or other beneficials in the area. We don't want to wash them off too. If you want to choose to use a pesticide, some eco-friendly options would be narrow spectrum pesticide like insecticidal soap. Narrow spectrum just means it only targets a small group of pests. So insecticidal soap works with, it targets soft-bodied insects like aphids and whitefly, soft scale mealybug as well. So that's going to be a great option, and it doesn't harm a lot of other critters out there. So we won't so there's less of a harm to other critters. And then there's also slightly more broad spectrum pesticides that can be effective, like horticultural oils, neem, and organocide. Spider mites, also very, will be more common when it heats up a little bit more and there's less moisture. They do actually like poor air circulation. So plants that are kind of densely packed, haven't been pruned in a while, they will, that could attract spider mites. So really, if you want to avoid them, just make sure you're selectively pruning to open up plants and increase airflow. Again, avoid feeding with synthetic fertilizers. Using broad spectrum pesticides too often can invite in spider mites because, of course, you're potentially killing their natural predators. And there's some plants that are just prone to spider mites, so just be aware of what plants are in your garden. It might just attract them, and that way what you can do is just be very aware of that, monitor for them, and really focusing on the plant health. Similar to, I would say somewhat similar to aphids and whitefly, we're going to really focus on irrigation and not use synthetic fertilizers and focus on organic fertilizers. We will invite in the beneficial insects like green lacewings. We will wipe or wash off the pests, and really close monitoring is actually is a great way to prevent spider mites, because a lot of times by the time we see the spider mite damage, spider mites might have already left. So we got to make sure, so we got to monitor early, especially if we know we have plants that are prone to them, and then try to get, if we are going to wash them off or spray them with a pesticide, we want to make sure they're actually present before we do that, because a lot of times they're so tiny that we see the damage, but the pests are long gone. Some of the eco pesticides that we could use, similar, trying that insecticidal soap first, and then maybe considering a pyrethrin canola oil mix like Takedown by Monterey, and then also those oils, the neem horticultural oils and organocide.
All right, so cucumber beetles. And this is going to be a little general for beetles as a category. However, specifically cucumber beetles, they are not man bugs, unlike, sometimes people associate them with the ladybug, like it's the man bug. This is a pest. It is our western spotted cucumber beetle. They are about the same size as the ladybugs. And they will overwinter. So this is one reason why it's so important to rotate annual food crops. They also feed on a wide variety of plants. So their host is going to not necessarily just going to focus on one plant that we can manage. Actually, we want to monitor further damage throughout the garden. The larvae that overwinters is going to feed on plant roots and live in the soil until it emerges as an adult. So right now, as the soil temperatures are warming, we're going to start to see the activity of the adult. Those larvae are going to be emerging as an adult very soon. And they do like moist conditions. So something to keep in mind, we want to then water or focus our irrigation practices for the early morning hours, typically around those sunrise hours, and then making sure we're allowing those areas to dry out between watering. Consistent watering is going to be poor for our plants, but then also attract pests similar to the cucumber beetle and others. We want to weed mow areas or cut those weeds down. This is going to reduce their activity because they'll be reducing their places of harborage. We're going to we're going to apply beneficial nematodes to the soil now. This is the perfect time. And the reason why beneficial nematodes, which are microscopic worm-like organisms, feed on the larvae of many pests that we see around the garden. There are 3 different species that are available for us to purchase. We want to make sure each species will feed on a very large variety of pests. So when we purchase the beneficial nematodes, we want to make sure we're getting the right beneficial nematode to feed on the pest that we want to manage. We're going to clean up that plant debris to reduce the overwintering of pests, although this could be a little challenging because oftentimes we want to leave some of the plant debris for overwintering beneficial insects and native bees. So that's where we have to find some balance. And then we can use traps. There are sticky traps that have like a pheromone attractant. Those are going to help monitor and reduce populations. However, I recommend only using them when we have when we've reached our threshold of tolerance, because when we use sticky traps in the garden, they will trap insects indiscriminately. So if a beneficial happens to fly by and kind of gets too close, it will also get stuck. Something I'd like to share, another pest that can benefit from us applying beneficial nematodes right now is the vegetable leaf miner. So any of us that like to grow food crops like chard, beets, or spinach, vegetable leaf miner is problematic and starts to show up as soon as the temperature's warm. So if we can inoculate those soils right now with the beneficial nematode that is specific or that also includes that vegetable leaf miner, we can break that life cycle and reduce that population. And then here's the beautiful thing about cucumber beetles, as well as many other beetles. But cucumber beetles have this funny defense mechanism that when you get close, they just drop straight down. Sometimes they'll fly away as well, but they have a tendency to just drop right down. So I will go out with a little bucket of water and I will, with a little soap in it, and then I just kind of put it under the flower of where I see the cucumber beetle, and I act as if I'm going to knock it in, and it just usually drops right into the bucket of soapy water on its own. So it's a really great way to manage them, especially during the cooler time of the day when they're not going to fly as easily. Very effective. To really walking around with a bucket of water is great for managing all types of beetles, as well as slugs and snails. But we have an assortment of beetles and weevils throughout the Bay Area. The warmer temperatures, we have a tendency to see more of these weevils and plant-eating beetles. So that's when we want to hand remove them, knock them into that bucket of soapy water, even getting the shop vac out. I have a miniature shop vac that I can go and kind of vacuum them up. It sounds crazy, but it's very effective. So this is just another way to manage pest problems. And so now I get the very special honor to talk to you about IPM for varmints. So many of us are faced with these pests, voles, moles, gophers, and rats. And I'm going to discuss management, which includes prevention, exclusion, and elimination. So there will be a discussion about eliminating these pests, I'm sorry to say. However, responsible elimination is done in the most humane way. So I just want to just put that out there. But if you are very sensitive and don't want to hear about this, I'll be talking for probably about 5 minutes about managing these varmints. So you can mute and then come back. So proper identification is really important. This is where a lot of people that I work with, that Charlotte works with in the aisle, they're not sure. Okay, and that's fair. So something to keep in mind, voles will create a very clean hole that is usually about maybe 1.5 to 2 inches in diameter. Very clean, and there is not going to be any like backfill or of soil. Moles are literally making a mound. So it looks like a volcano from the profile. It's a perfect mound. And yes, that's exactly what it looks like right in the middle. And then the gophers, the way they dig tunnel out is kind of at an angle. So they're actually fanning the soil out as they're coming out of their tunnel. However, it doesn't always look this perfect, like the seashell or this kind of C-shaped, but there is always a plug. So if you see on the middle, like maybe 9 o'clock, if this were a clock, to tell the time. And if it was squished like an oval, where 9 o'clock is, that is the plug. So even though the gopher mound might not be exactly oval shaped, there usually is a plug. So voles. Voles will create clean holes to their burrow, as I mentioned. They also create these surface runways. So that picture down below in the center is after an area has been mowed and now the runways are exposed. And they will then oftentimes we see this activity going towards shrubs or trees because they really like to feed on the bark and the outer layers of trees and shrubs. So the best way to manage voles, it's actually really simple and very effective, was we're just going to mow those grassy areas to prevent runways and to open up their exposure because they know that they are prey. So they will be less likely to be active in these open areas. We are going to also use good old fashioned wooden mouse traps that have that paddle that kind of looks like a plastic piece of Swiss cheese that we're going to put it on either side of their tunnel as they exit. They're going to run out, or we're going to put it in line of the runway. And what happens is they kind of run right into it, and that's how they get eliminated. And then moles. So as I mentioned, the mole mounds look exactly like a volcano. Moles are shallow tunnelers. So that's why oftentimes we are seeing their tunneling system throughout our garden and through our turf areas, okay? They are really tunneling just about 4 to 6 inches below the surface of the soil. They are beneficial, believe it or not. Moles are actually providing a tremendous service for us because they are eating the soil dwelling insects like the cucumber beetle larvae and that leaf miner larvae. They're eating it too, okay? So before we get too upset, let's just understand they're actually doing us some good, although they do make, they do create some of an aesthetic problem, but just know that they are helping us out. So to remove the moles, we want to remove their food source. So we're going to go back to applying those beneficial nematodes to the soil so that the nematodes can feed on those white grubs and the other soil dwelling larvae that is in the area that the moles are eating. That's simple. Remove the food source. We remove the pest. Gophers. So the gophers are going to actually be deeper tunnelers. They're going to be tunneling about 8 inches, maybe 10 inches below the surface of the soil. That's why we don't see their tracks underground. They are eating the roots and stems and leaves and fruits of plants. So yes, that is my butternut squash that gopher so cleverly nibbled on and enjoyed. And it was a pretty big squash. I was quite shocked when I saw it. So this is reality. Gophers are out there in abundance. Yeah. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So we want to really focus on prevention. So we're going to plant everything. All our plants are going to go into a gopher a basket. So we can make it out. We can buy the baskets. Gopher baskets are readily available all throughout the retailers. We can also make gopher baskets out of gopher wire or 1/2-inch hardware cloth. Gopher wire looks like poultry wire, but it has smaller holes. The holes are only about 1/2 inch or so, unlike the poultry wire, which is closer to 1 inch in diameter. So, and we're also going to line those raised beds with the gopher wire or 1/2-inch hardware cloth. I am going to also share that when we have our raised beds, I like to now do a skirt of that hardware cloth or gopher wire around the outside. I literally make a skirt that is like part of it is stapled to my raised bed and then it's sticking out probably about a good 2 feet to prevent any squash that might be spilling over my raised bed. Now the gophers cannot access it. So that was my lesson learned with that butternut squash. Okay. Thank you, Charlotte, for
Can I
backing
ask
up.
a question about that?
Yeah.
So the skirt is like out, like perpendicular to the raised, like if this is the raised bed wall and this is the raised bed, you're doing a skirt like this?
Yeah, right on top of the soil. So it's
Okay.
like I'm going to bend it up a couple, like maybe 4 or 6 inches, staple it really well. And then I'm going to have it come out and just go all the way around the surface of the soil. And then I'll have like some mulch on top, you don't see it.
Got it.
So the best way to manage gophers is to reduce their populations. Remember, gophers are food for coyotes, and we don't have coyotes in abundance around the urban areas. So that's why we will see more gophers. So there are many traps on the market. You want to use the traps that are most comfortable for you. I will also mention some other ways that if you're not into traps, so just bear with me. But working with traps is going to be very effective. We always want to secure that trap with a tether to something because gophers have been known to, and from personal experience, they will pull the trap into the burrowing system and you just lost a trap. Here's the deal. What's going to happen is they're going to most likely, if they haven't been captured when straight off the bat, and we are not baiting these traps, we're just putting them into that tunnel. If we don't capture them straight away, if there is no activity for, a couple of days, then that's not an active tunnel. So we're going to just close that up and try to find an active tunnel. When we have a gopher that's a little wise to us, he's going to backfill that trap and cover that trap with soil. Great. That means it's an active tunnel and that we've got some activity. So we might have to re-employ that trap, clean out the area, set it. And then what happens is that I've learned that the older mature bulls are a little bit smarter. They're actually quite smart. And so that's why I'll change up the trap and I'll go from what those pinch traps are, the 3 pitchers around the left and top right. And then I'll go to something that looks more like the black box. And then I'll dig out the area a little bit, fit that black box in there or that like black tunnel. And then typically that is success. All right. But here's the deal. We don't want to give up. Persistence is important. Okay. There is a reason why they made that movie Caddyshack. If you need to watch that again for some support, please do. But when we're setting traps, we really want to be mindful that we are securing that area so that only the gophers are the target. We do not want our dogs or cats or other pets to access it, or other critters that might be visiting the garden. So that's why we always want to secure it, like you'll see the picture on the lower right. And then when we have captured a gopher and it has been killed, now we're just going to release that gopher, the dead gopher, into that tunneling system and bury it. That's the way we manage the captured gopher. All right, so for those of us that are not comfortable with using traps, there are some repellents on the market that are very effective, although I want to stress that these are temporary deterrents and they do need to be applied in accordance to the directions. The directions are very specific, and oftentimes reapplication is necessary during the first few weeks for them to be effective. So what we've seen is that castor oil products, or products that contain castor oil, will be a little bit more effective. However, all these products will work when used in accordance to the label with reapplication, and they will be temporary deterrents for a period of time, typically around 6 months. All right, so managing rats in the garden. So we're always going to remove their places of harborage, okay? And from my experiences, we typically know where those places are. We're going to contain, remove those places of harborage, remove their cover, make sure that they don't have nice places to live or to make a den. And then we want to remove their food sources and access to those food sources. So we're going to contain those compost systems. We're going to contain the chicken coops. Typically, we will use products like a 1/4-inch hardware cloth. So if they are getting into that chicken coop and you've got just normal chicken wire, understand the rodents can just walk right in. So what we're going to do is we're just going to get 1/4-inch hardware cloth and staple it to the outside of that coop to secure the coop. We're going, and we do a similar thing with our compost stations. We're going to make sure our garbage cans are fitted with tight fitting lids. We're going to remove the pet food availability. We want to do our best to only feed our pets during a certain amount of time and then bring that food back in. The pets will learn if they're hungry to be around during that time. But when we're leaving pet food out all day, we're attracting a lot of other wildlife, which is causing a bigger problem. We want to rethink bird feeders. Maybe instead of putting bird feeders out, maybe we plant flowering plants that offer the seed, such as echinacea or sunflowers. When they go to seed, this is actually the food for the birds. Something to consider. We want to, as I mentioned, remove their food source. So whatever they're getting into, we want to eliminate their access to it. We also want to make sure we're trimming vines and branches away from structures, including our home and roof lines. And we want to prevent rodents from accessing any area that we don't want them to get to, specifically our food crops, with barriers or some type of exclusion, baskets, fencing, cages. These are some wonderful examples of how we can do that. And then there is a wonderful, excellent outdoor rodent trap. It's called the Good Nature A24. It is a humane, safe, and effective trap for managing rodents outside. This was really set up or designed for, areas like livestock, chicken coops, again, where we have a lot of feed around, and it is really difficult to kind of, manage or exclude them completely. But this is going to be a trap that if you do have activity in your garden that is kind of persistent, then this would be a great solution for you. And then inviting birds of prey. It's not just the coyotes that like to eat these critters, but it's also our raptors. So, especially during raptor breeding season, understand that owls and our hawks and our falcons need to feed their young, and they do a very good job at hunting and reducing the populations because they need to feed their young with these critters.
All right. Thanks everyone for still being here. We have a couple more slides. I know it's 6, but we'll go a few minutes over and then we'll answer your questions. So thank you for your patience. So all those, we talked about all those pests, and really we mentioned mostly we mentioned just a lot of ways to deal with them without using pesticides. Because when we do use pesticides, we need to understand that they do not solve the problem, the pest problem. They are a temporary fix, if that. And if we don't understand why the pest is there or fix maybe the conditions to reduce the pest problem, then we will continue to have that pest going to come back. And there's a lot of risks involved in using pesticides. So sometimes we just want to consider if it's worth it. So when we use pesticides in IPM, it's always a last resort. We've tried all of the cultural, mechanical, biological controls possible. We will choose the less toxic and eco-friendly option, and you can refer to the Our Water, Our World website to learn more about which ones those are, or hopefully see them in a store labeled. We are always applying the pesticide according to the label. We can't stress that enough. I recommend reading the label before you even buy the product. Make sure it does work for the pest that you have. Understand how you're going to apply it, how often to apply it, and what to do if it hopefully doesn't, but gets on your skin, eyes, things like that. We want to know how to store it and all the warning safety precautions that goes with it. We also want to always wear our personal protective equipment, our PPE, long sleeves, long pants, eye covering, face covering. Even with eco-friendly products, they can still cause harm to ourselves. So we want to make sure we're taking care, protecting ourselves as well. And we're going to understand the risks, not just to ourselves, but to the environment, the soil, the good bugs in the garden, pets, kids, etc., and waterways, of course. We're going to understand our pesticides. We are going to know the pest that we have and target only that pest. So we're only spraying where that pest is when the pest is present. I guess the only exception would be for that peach leaf curl or other dormant spraying where we do use it as a preventative spray. But generally, most pesticides either need to come in contact with the pest or they need to be eaten by the pest. So we really want to make sure the pest is there. We're going to understand the pest life cycle and apply the pesticide at the best time. Some pesticides won't work on certain pests in certain parts of their life cycle. So we want to make sure we understand that. And then we want to understand the active ingredient listed on the front, how it works, what is the mode of action? Is it a contact kill? Does it need to be consumed? Is it a suffocant? All of these ways that products work, we want to understand that, and that will allow us to most efficiently and safely apply the pesticide. So when we are applying the pesticide, we're going to spot treat, targeting just the pest, where the pest is when the pest is present, not spraying the whole garden. We are going to apply pesticides at dusk, which is when the good bugs in the garden are less active. Also, many pesticides we don't want to spray during the day because either it could burn the plant or they break down in sunlight. There's lots of reasons. So applying the pesticides at dusk when there's no rain in the forecast and there's no breeze or wind current, that's when we are going to apply to keep the product in where we are targeting. We are going to avoid applying when plants are in bloom because some pesticides can either deter bees and other pollinators or harm them as well. So if we want to attract the pollinators to our garden, we are going to reduce using pesticides when plants are in bloom and in general. We don't want to apply pesticides when in over 85 degrees, so not quite yet, but soon in the East Bay, it's going to get quite hot. We don't want to apply temperature when temperatures get that high. It is going to be too stressful for the plants. Similarly, water stress plants, we don't want to avoid applying pesticides to those. These are plants that are either that are usually don't have enough water. Applying pesticides to them can actually harm them as well, the plant itself. And if we are going to use beneficial insects like ladybugs or green lacewings, we want to make sure we give them time to find the pests before we turn to a pesticide as well. And then just two invasive species to be aware of. The Asian citrus psyllid carries a disease called Huang Long Bing, and it is a bacterial disease that can be really detrimental to citrus and the commercial citrus industry. That's why there is a lot of regulation in the state of California and actually probably around the country. I know in Florida too, about moving citrus. There's a lot of limits on that, and that is to control this disease. So it was first detected in San Diego in 2008, and it was also found in LA in 2012. I don't believe there's any active, anything active right now in like the Bay Area in Northern California, but there are areas of quarantine where we can't move plants in or out of. So just keep an eye out. If you have citrus in your yard, just recommend that you just are monitoring, looking for these very unusual looking bugs, like their larvae have these weird little white tendrils. It can cause a yellowing of leaves, which is really common in citrus. So don't freak out if you have yellowing leaves or like curling leaves. It's likely not this, but we do want to make sure that we are aware of this psyllid. And if we do see it or anything, even if you're just concerned, you think it could be it, just take a picture or contact the CDFA hotline. It's better to be safe and keep all of our citrus safe as well. And then also there's the spotter and lanternfly. As far as I know, has not been spotted in California. It has not entered the state, but it can enter really easily. The egg masses look basically just like moss or lichen, so super easy to be on the underside of vehicles or on wood, firewood, and come into the state. We do not want this pest. It is causing a lot of damage in like the mid-Atlantic states, New York, Pennsylvania. It has many host plants, grapes, apples, stone fruits, walnut, willow, lots of plants that are here in California and are very important to the state. So we really want to make sure we're not moving firewood, we're not moving plant matter in and out of the state, and we are keeping an eye out for these really strange kind of looking nymphs in very bright black, white, red, or black and white colors. And then the moth itself is actually quite beautiful. But of course, if we see it, we need to take a picture of it, hopefully capture it immediately and call the CDFA. And then you have been given a pest or an online, resource page, but just to share that we have the Our Water, Our World website with lots of different pests, information about the different pests, and then the UC IPM program has a huge database on basically every pest in California and how to manage them with less toxic options. If you want to learn more about bugs or work on your identification, there's bugguide.net. And then if you want to learn more about active ingredients in the pesticides that you may or may not use, but you can learn more about a pesticide before you buy it, how it works, how the mode of action, you can go to the National Pesticide Information Center right there. And thank you. Sorry, I went over a little bit, but I feel like 6:10 is kind of a pretty good length for us. Thank you, and feel free to add in some questions. We will stick around and answer a few. Any questions?